The first gunshot nearly took her hat clean off her head as Beatrice Ashwood rode hard toward the rising smoke in the distance, her heart pounding against her ribs like a war drum. Arizona Territory, 1885, was no place for a woman alone, but Beatrice had long since stopped caring what people thought a woman should or shouldn't do. The second shot kicked up dust just inches from her horse's hooves. She ducked lower, urging her chestnut mare forward. The black smoke billowed higher against the clear blue sky, and Beatrice knew whatever awaited her at the O'Malley ranch couldn't be good. "Come on, Penny," she whispered to her mare, patting the horse's neck. "Just a little farther." Beatrice had been working at Doc Wilson's clinic in Copper Creek for nearly 3 years now. At 32, she'd resigned herself to a life without a family of her own. Not by choice, the fever that had nearly taken her life at 25 had left her barren, a fact her fiancé couldn't accept. When she'd found him in the arms of another woman, she'd packed her things and headed west, determined to build a life of purpose. The O'Malley ranch came into view as she crested the hill. Flames licked the sky from the barn and were spreading quickly toward the main house. She could see figures moving, people running, but something wasn't right. She pulled up short at the sight of 3 men on horseback circling the property like vultures. Rustlers or worse, she figured, taking advantage of the chaos. One of them spotted her and raised his rifle. Beatrice didn't hesitate. She jerked Penny's reins hard to the left and galloped toward a copse of cottonwood trees, bullets whizzing past her ears. She dismounted quickly, tethered Penny, and pulled her father's old Colt revolver from her saddlebag. "You stay here, girl," she whispered, checking that the gun was loaded. She crept forward through the brush, keeping low. The main house was starting to catch now, the porch already engulfed. From her position, she could see a man lying motionless in the dirt. Mr. O'Malley, she realized with a chill. The rustlers were busy loading cattle into a makeshift pen they'd constructed, paying no mind to the burning buildings. Then she heard children crying. The sound cut through the crackling fire and the lowing cattle. She peered harder and saw them, 2 small boys huddled against the wall of the burning house, trapped by fallen debris and advancing flames, the O'Malley twins. They couldn't be more than 6 years old. Beatrice didn't think twice. She circled wide around the rustlers' position, using the smoke for cover. Her lungs burned, but she pushed forward, keeping low until she reached the back of the property. The heat was blistering as she approached the house from behind. Through a broken window, she could see the boys clearly now, trapped in what appeared to be the kitchen. They were huddled together, coughing in the thickening smoke. "Boys," she called softly, trying not to alert the rustlers. "Over here." The smaller of the twins looked up, his face streaked with tears and soot. "Miss B?" "Yes, it's me. Can you climb out this window?" The older twin Jack, she thought his name was, shook his head. "Pa told us to stay put. He went to get Ma, and then there was shouting." Beatrice's heart sank. She'd seen Mr. O'Malley outside, and there was no sign of his wife. "Listen to me now. Your pa would want you safe. I'm going to help you out." The window frame was hot to the touch, but she managed to clear the broken glass. "Come on now, one at a time." She helped the first boy through, then the second, just as the kitchen ceiling began to collapse. She pulled them close, shielding them from the sight of their burning home. "Where's Pa?" the younger twin asked, his voice small. "We need to be very quiet now," she whispered, avoiding the question. "There are bad men here. We need to get to my horse without them seeing us." The boys nodded solemnly, their small faces serious beyond their years. Beatrice took each by the hand and began leading them in a wide arc around the property. They had almost made it to the cottonwoods when a shout went up. One of the rustlers had spotted them. "Run!" Beatrice pushed the boys ahead of her toward the trees where Penny waited. A bullet splintered the bark of a tree trunk inches from her head. She spun around, raised her father's Colt, and fired 2 shots in rapid succession. One of the rustlers yelled in pain and fell from his horse. The others turned toward her, but they were distracted by a new sound, pounding hoofbeats approaching fast from the east. Beatrice didn't wait to see who was coming. She rushed the boys to Penny, lifted them onto the saddle, and swung up behind them. With a kick of her heels, they were off, galloping away from the burning ranch and the gunfire that had erupted behind them. They rode hard for nearly an hour, the boys clinging to the saddle horn while Beatrice held them secure. Finally, when Penny began to tire, Beatrice slowed their pace and guided them toward a small creek she knew. As they dismounted by the water, the full weight of what had happened seemed to settle on the twins' small shoulders. They stood silent, shock evident in their wide eyes. "Are you hurt?" Beatrice asked gently, kneeling before them. Both boys shook their heads. "I'm Jack," the slightly taller one said. "This is James." "I know who you are," she said with a soft smile. "You've been to Doc Wilson's when you had the chicken pox, remember?" James nodded slowly. "Where's Pa and Ma?" Beatrice felt her throat tighten. These boys had just lost everything, and now they needed truth from her. She took a deep breath. "I don't know for certain," she said carefully, "but I think your Pa was hurt trying to protect you and your Ma." "Is he dead?" Jack asked directly, his young voice steady in a way that broke her heart. "I think he might be," she answered honestly. "I didn't see your Ma." James began to cry silently, tears cutting clean tracks through the soot on his face. Jack put an arm around his brother but remained dry-eyed, staring at Beatrice with a gaze too old for his years. "What do we do now?" he asked. "First, we get you cleaned up and make sure you're really not hurt," she said, guiding them to the creek's edge. "Then we'll find somewhere safe to stay tonight. Tomorrow we'll ride to town and talk to Sheriff Morgan." As she helped the boys wash the soot from their faces and hands, Beatrice's mind raced. She couldn't take them to her small room above the clinic. It was barely big enough for her. The hotel might work for a night or two, but then what? They had no relatives that she knew of. The O'Malleys had been newcomers to the area, keeping mostly to themselves. That night they made camp in a sheltered hollow, far enough from the main trails to be safe. Beatrice built a small fire and shared the jerky and hardtack she kept in her saddlebags. The boys ate silently, exhaustion evident in their drooping shoulders. "You boys should get some sleep," she said, spreading her bedroll for them. "I'll keep watch." She didn't expect them to fall asleep easily after what they'd been through, but within minutes of lying down, both were sound asleep, curled together like puppies seeking warmth. Beatrice sat by the small fire, her father's Colt in her lap, and tried to make sense of it all. Rustlers weren't uncommon, but burning out a family and likely killing the parents, that was the work of men with darker intentions. The O'Malley place wasn't the biggest ranch around, but it was well situated, with good water rights. Someone had wanted that land badly enough to murder for it. The snap of a twig in the darkness brought her instantly alert, gun raised. She held her breath, listening. "Don't shoot," came a low, male voice. "I'm coming in slow." A tall figure emerged from the shadows, hands raised in plain sight. The firelight revealed a face Beatrice recognized: Brody O'Connor, owner of the neighboring Rocking Bee Ranch. His dark hair was disheveled, and a smudge of soot marked one cheekbone. His blue eyes were grave as they met hers. "Miss Ashwood," he said with a slight nod. "I've been tracking you since you rode out with the boys." Beatrice kept her gun steady. "How do I know you weren't with those men at the O'Malley place?" A flash of anger crossed his face, quickly controlled. "I rode in with Sheriff Morgan and my men when we saw the smoke. We were too late for Tom and Mary, but we ran off those bastards, pardon my language." His eyes drifted to the sleeping boys. "We found tracks leading away and I followed, hoping it was the twins. Found your tracks instead." Slowly, Beatrice lowered her gun. She'd met Brody O'Connor a few times in town and at community gatherings. He had a reputation as a fair man who ran a clean operation. She'd treated him once for a gash on his arm, earned breaking a new horse. He'd been polite, if somewhat reserved. "The boys are unharmed," she said. Scared and in shock, but not hurt. Relief washed over his features. "Thank God, and thank you for saving them." He moved closer, taking a seat across the fire from her. "Not many would have ridden toward gunfire and flames like you did." "I couldn't just ride past," she said simply. They sat in silence for a moment, the fire crackling between them. "What happened after I left?" she finally asked. Brody's face darkened. "Sheriff got one of them. He's locked up in Copper Creek now, but he's not talking. The other two got away. Tom O'Malley is dead. Mary too, we found her in the back bedroom." He paused, lowering his voice further. It wasn't just rustling. The place was deliberately torched, and they made sure the family was inside when they did it. The boys were trapped in the kitchen when I found them, Beatrice said. Who would do such a thing? I have my suspicions, he replied grimly. There's been talk of the railroad wanting that land as a right-of-way, and there are always men willing to do ugly work for the right price. What will happen to Jack and James now? Brody glanced at the sleeping children. They've got no other family that anyone knows of. Usually in cases like this, the children would be sent to an orphanage in Tucson. Beatrice felt a pang in her chest at the thought of the twins being shipped off to some cold institution, separated from everything they'd known. That's not right, she said firmly. No, it isn't, Brody agreed, surprising her. Which is why I'd like to offer them a home at my ranch. I've got the room, and my housekeeper, Mrs. Flores, is good with children. Beatrice studied him across the fire. That's very generous, Mr. O'Connor. He shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. Tom was a good neighbor. We weren't close friends, but a man takes care of his own in this country. Those boys deserve better than an orphanage. Something in his expression made Beatrice wonder if there was more to his offer than simple neighborly duty, but she didn't press. For tonight, we should let them sleep, she said. Tomorrow we'll ride to town together and speak with the sheriff. Brody nodded, then stood. I'll take first watch. You should get some rest, Miss Ashwood. You've had quite a day. Too exhausted to argue, Beatrice settled beside the sleeping boys, her guns still within reach. Despite her fatigue, sleep was slow to come as her mind replayed the day's events and worried over the future that awaited the O'Malley twins. Morning brought a somber journey to Copper Creek. The boys rode with Beatrice on Penny, while Brody rode alongside on his big bay gelding. They didn't speak much, each lost in their own thoughts. The twins occasionally whispered to each other, but mostly they remained silent, their small bodies tense against Beatrice. The sheriff's office was their first stop in town. Sheriff Morgan was a graying man with a weathered face who'd served the county for over 15 years. He listened gravely as Beatrice recounted finding the boys and escaping the rustlers. You showed real courage, Miss Ashwood, he said when she finished. Foolhardy, perhaps, but courage all the same. What will happen to the boys now? She asked directly. The sheriff sighed, glancing at the twins who sat quietly on a bench, their legs dangling. I've sent a telegram to the territorial authorities. Standard procedure is to place orphans in the care of the Sisters of Mercy in Tucson until permanent arrangements can be made. I'd like to offer them a home, Brody spoke up from where he leaned against the wall. My ranch has plenty of room, and it would keep them in familiar surroundings. Sheriff Morgan scratched his chin thoughtfully. That's mighty generous, Brody, but there are procedures. The territory has to ensure children are placed properly. And a bachelor rancher might not be considered proper placement, Beatrice added quietly, understanding the unspoken concern. Brody's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue the point. What about me? Beatrice heard herself say, the words surprising even herself. I work with Dr. Wilson. I have a respectable position in the community. You're also unmarried, Miss Ashwood, the sheriff pointed out gently. And your accommodations above the clinic are hardly suitable for 2 growing boys. Beatrice felt a flush of frustration. So we simply ship them off to strangers because neither of us meets some arbitrary standard of propriety. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room, broken only when Jack slid off the bench and approached the adults. We don't want to go to an orphanage, he said clearly, his young voice steady despite the fear evident in his eyes. James is scared of the dark and they'll separate us. Pa always said we had to stick together. Beatrice's heart clenched at the boy's words. She knelt down to his level. Jack, sometimes grown-ups have to follow certain rules even when they don't seem fair. But you saved us, James said, joining his brother. Why can't we stay with you? Before Beatrice could answer, Dr. Wilson himself entered the sheriff's office, his white beard bristling as he took in the scene. I heard what happened, he said, nodding to everyone present. Terrible business, and I understand these young men need a proper home. That's what we're discussing, Doc, Sheriff Morgan said. Well then, perhaps I have a solution. The old doctor turned to Beatrice. Miss Ashwood, you've been saying for months that you need larger accommodations to expand your herbal work. The Peterson place at the edge of town is vacant and available. It's not grand, but it has 3 bedrooms and a good garden plot. Beatrice blinked in surprise. Doctor Wilson, I appreciate the thought, but I could never afford. The clinic will cover half the rent as a professional investment in your work, he interrupted firmly. I've been meaning to discuss it with you anyway. Brody stepped forward. And I'm willing to contribute to ensure the boys have a proper home. He glanced at Beatrice. With no strings attached, of course, just neighborly support. Beatrice felt overwhelmed. This is all happening very fast. I'm not sure I'm prepared to be anyone's mother. Sometimes life doesn't give us time to prepare, Dr. Wilson said kindly. But from what I've observed over our 3 years working together, you have more maternal instinct than most. These boys need someone who cares, and you clearly do. Sheriff Morgan cleared his throat. It's still not entirely regular, but given the circumstances, I could recommend to the territorial authorities that the boys remain in Miss Ashwood's care temporarily, while more permanent arrangements are considered. Temporarily wasn't ideal, but it was a start. Beatrice looked at the twins' hopeful faces and felt something shift inside her. These children needed her, and perhaps in a way she hadn't recognized until now she needed them too. All right, she said firmly. I'll do it, but I have conditions. She turned to Brody. I appreciate your offer of financial support, Mr. O'Connor, but I won't accept charity. If you wish to contribute to the boys' upbringing, it needs to be in a way that preserves my independence and their dignity. Brody studied her for a moment, respect dawning in his eyes. What do you suggest? I understand you're expanding your cattle operation. I propose that you set aside 2 calves in the boys' names each year. As they grow, so will their small herd. By the time they're grown, they'll have the beginnings of their own stake. A slow smile spread across Brody's face. That's a sound business proposition, Miss Ashwood. I accept. Then it's settled, Dr. Wilson said, clapping his hands together. I'll speak to Peterson this afternoon about the house. As the adults finalized details, Beatrice felt a small hand slip into hers. Looking down, she found both twins standing beside her, their faces solemn but their eyes holding the first glimmer of hope she'd seen since the fire. Does this mean we can stay with you? James asked quietly. Yes, she answered, squeezing their hands. For now, you're coming home with me. The Peterson house proved to be better than Beatrice had expected. Though modest, it was solidly built with a comfortable parlor, a kitchen with a good cast iron stove, and 3 small but adequate bedrooms. The garden, while overgrown, showed promise, and there was even a small stable at the back of the property where Penny could be housed. Moving in was accomplished with surprising speed and community support. Dr. Wilson contributed furniture from his storage. The Ladies' Aid Society from the church appeared with linens and kitchenware, and Brody sent over a wagon of firewood and basic provisions. Even Sheriff Morgan helped, bringing tools and spending an afternoon repairing the back steps and a leaking roof section. The twins settled in with the resilience of youth, though Beatrice often heard them crying softly at night. She would sit with them, sometimes telling stories, other times simply being present until they drifted back to sleep. During the days, they followed her like shadows, clearly afraid of being separated from her. Beatrice continued her work with Dr. Wilson, but arranged her schedule to be home when the boys returned from school. She learned to cook more substantial meals than the simple fare she'd prepared for herself, discovered that laundry for 3 was exponentially more complicated than laundry for 1, and found reserves of patience she hadn't known she possessed. 3 weeks after they moved in, Brody O'Connor appeared at their door one Saturday morning, hat in hand. "Good morning, Miss Ashwood," he said, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, Mr. O'Connor," she replied, wiping her hands on her apron. She'd been teaching the boys to bake bread, and flour dusted her sleeves. "Would you like to come in? Thank you." The twins appeared from the kitchen, faces lighting up at the sight of their visitor. They'd taken to Brody during his occasional visits to town, especially after he'd brought them each a carved wooden horse the week before. "Mr. O'Connor," James exclaimed, "did you bring Samson?" Samson was Brody's dog, a friendly border collie who had accompanied him on his last visit. Brody chuckled. "Not today, James, but he sends his regards." He produced 2 peppermint sticks from his pocket, handing one to each boy. "I actually came to speak with Miss Ashwood if you boys don't mind giving us a few minutes." Jack nodded seriously. "We need to finish our bread anyway." "Come on, James." He tugged his brother back toward the kitchen. Alone in the parlor, Beatrice gestured for Brody to take a seat. "What brings you to town, Mr. O'Connor?" Brody sat, his hat turning slowly in his hands. "Several things. First, I wanted to let you know that Sheriff Morgan received word from the territorial authorities. They've approved your temporary guardianship of the boys with a review in 6 months." Relief washed over Beatrice. "That's wonderful news." "Yes, it is." Brody hesitated, then continued. "I also wanted to inform you that we've made progress in the matter of the O'Malley murders. The man we captured has finally started talking. It seems you were right about the railroad connection. He named Clayton Hughes as the one who hired them, the land speculator. Beatrice had met Hughes once at a town social. He'd struck her as coldly ambitious, but she wouldn't have marked him as a murderer. The same. He's been buying up properties along the proposed railway route. Apparently, Tom O'Malley refused to sell, even when offered a substantial sum. Brody's expression darkened. Hughes decided to remove the obstacle permanently and make it look like a rustling gone wrong. "Have they arrested him?" "Yesterday. He'll stand trial in Tucson next month. Sheriff Morgan will need your testimony about what you witnessed." Beatrice nodded. "Of course, the boys. They won't need to testify. The confession and other witnesses should be sufficient." Brody set his hat aside and leaned forward slightly. "There's one more matter I wanted to discuss. The territorial court will be settling the O'Malley estate. The land and what remains of the cattle will likely be sold to cover debts, with any remainder held in trust for the boys until they come of age." "I see," Beatrice said quietly, thinking of the twins' inheritance being reduced to a monetary figure in some account, their family legacy erased. "I'd like to purchase the property," Brody continued. "Not to absorb it into the rocking bee, but to hold it in stewardship until the boys are grown. They should have the chance to reclaim their birthright if they choose." Beatrice studied him, surprised by his thoughtfulness. "That's very generous." Brody shook his head. "It's what's right, which brings me to my final point." He took a deep breath. "Miss Ashwood, Beatrice, I've come to greatly admire the way you've stepped up to care for Jack and James. You've shown remarkable courage and compassion." "They're wonderful boys," she said simply. "Anyone would have done the same." "No, they wouldn't," he countered firmly. "Most would have ridden past that burning ranch. Most would have left orphaned children to the system without a second thought. You're an extraordinary woman." Beatrice felt her cheeks warm at his praise. "Mr. O'Connor, Brody, please." "Brody," she amended. "I appreciate your kind words, but I'm simply doing what needs to be done." He smiled slightly. "That's precisely what I admire." He paused, seemed to gather his thoughts. "I realize this may seem precipitous, but I'd like to call on you properly. With your permission." Beatrice blinked in surprise. "Call on me? You mean court you," he clarified, his steady gaze never leaving hers. "I've respected you since we first met, but these past weeks have shown me the kind of woman you truly are. I find myself thinking about you even when ranch business should occupy my mind." I don't know what to say," she managed, genuinely flustered. It had been years since a man had expressed interest in her, and she'd long ago accepted that her inability to bear children made her an unsuitable match for most. "You don't need to say anything now," Brody assured her. "Just consider allowing me to visit occasionally. We could get to know each other better outside of these difficult circumstances." From the kitchen came the sound of laughter as the boys apparently encountered some amusing aspect of bread making. The sound warmed Beatrice's heart, but also highlighted her concerns. "The boys have already lost so much," she said carefully. "I need to consider what's best for them." Brody nodded, understanding. "Of course, they're your priority as they should be. I admire that about you too." He rose to his feet. "Think about it, that's all I ask." As he prepared to leave, the twins rushed in from the kitchen, flour-streaked and excited to show off their bread dough. Brody knelt to their level, examining their work with serious attention that made the boys beam with pride. Watching them, Beatrice felt an unexpected tug of possibility. Perhaps, in this unconventional situation, there was room for something she had long since stopped hoping for, not just a family created through circumstance, but one built by choice as well. The weeks that followed brought a new rhythm to Beatrice's life. The boys started school, initially reluctant to leave her side but gradually gaining confidence. She continued her work with Dr. Wilson, using her knowledge of herbal remedies to complement his more traditional medical treatments. And true to his word, Brody began to call on her regularly. His visits were never intrusive. Sometimes he brought small gifts, fresh fruit from his orchard, a book he thought she might enjoy, carved toys for the boys. Other times he simply offered practical assistance, fixing a broken shutter or helping to expand her herb garden. The twins adored him, especially when he began teaching them to ride on a gentle pony he brought to town specifically for that purpose. By midsummer, Beatrice found herself looking forward to his visits with an anticipation that both surprised and unsettled her. It had been so long since she'd allowed herself to consider the possibility of romance that she scarcely recognized the signs in herself, the extra care she took with her appearance on days he might visit, the way her pulse quickened at the sound of his voice, the lingering glances they exchanged when the boys weren't watching. One particularly warm evening in August, after the twins were asleep, Brody invited her to sit on the porch swing he had installed for her birthday the month before. The boys seemed to be settling well, he observed, gently pushing the swing with one boot. Jack mentioned today that he wants to be a doctor like you someday. Beatrice smiled, touched. He has a natural caregiving instinct. James is convinced he'll be a rancher like his father, and like you, she added softly. They're fortunate to have options, Brody said. And to have you guiding them. They swung in comfortable silence for a few moments, listening to the chorus of cicadas and distant coyotes. The review of your guardianship is coming up next month, Brody finally said. Are you concerned about it? Beatrice had been trying not to dwell on it, but the approaching territorial review did worry her. A bit, she admitted. The boys are doing well, but there's always the possibility that the authorities will decide a single woman isn't the ideal guardian for two boys. You've provided them with a loving home, stability, education. What more could anyone ask? Society has very specific ideas about what constitutes a proper family, she replied, a hint of bitterness in her tone. And I don't fit that mold. Brody turned to face her more directly. Beatrice, there's something I've been wanting to discuss with you, something important. The seriousness in his voice made her pulse quicken. Yes, over these past months my admiration for you has only deepened. You're the strongest, most compassionate woman I've ever known. He took her hand gently in his. I find myself thinking of you constantly, your smile, your quiet determination, the way you've created a family through sheer force of will. Brody, please let me finish. His blue eyes held hers steadily. I know this might seem sudden to some, but life out here has taught me not to waste time when something truly matters. And you matter to me, Beatrice. You and the boys. With his free hand, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Beatrice's breath caught in her throat. I'm asking you to consider becoming my wife, he said, opening the box to reveal a simple but elegant gold ring set with a small sapphire. Not just to secure your guardianship of the twins, though that would certainly be assured, but because I've fallen in love with you. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me. Beatrice stared at the ring, emotions warring within her, joy, uncertainty, hope, and fear all tangled together in her chest. Brody, I care for you deeply, but there's something you need to understand. She took a deep breath. I can't have children of my own. An illness years ago left me barren. It's why my fiancé in Boston left me. And he was a fool, Brody said firmly, without hesitation. Beatrice, I'm not proposing to you as a broodmare. I'm asking you to be my wife because of who you are, your mind, your heart, your spirit. I've seen how you mother Jack and James, how you've become essential to this community as a healer. You've already done more good in this world than most people manage in a lifetime." Tears pricked at Beatrice's eyes. "But don't you want children of your own?" "I want a family," he corrected gently. "And we already have the beginnings of one with Jack and James. If you're concerned about heirs for the rocking bee, well, there are two fine boys already who could grow into that role if they choose." His words touched Beatrice deeply. For so long she had defined herself by what she couldn't do, what she couldn't be. Yet here was a man who saw beyond that limitation to the woman she truly was. "The boys have grown quite attached to you," she said softly. "And I to them," he replied with a smile. "But it's your answer I'm waiting for, Beatrice." She looked into his eyes and saw the future she had stopped believing was possible, not just security for the twins, but companionship, respect, and love for herself. "Yes," she whispered, and then more firmly, "Yes, I'll marry you, Brodie O'Connor." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. When he leaned forward to kiss her, Beatrice felt as though something long broken inside her had finally begun to heal. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small Copper Creek church. The entire town turned out for the event, which had become something of a celebration not just of their union, but of the community's resilience in the face of tragedy. The territorial review of the boys' guardianship was summarily approved when the judge learned of the marriage, with full adoption proceedings to follow. The 4 of them moved to the Rocking Bee after the wedding, though Beatrice maintained her professional relationship with Dr. Wilson, riding into town 3 days a week. The twins adapted to ranch life with enthusiasm, especially once they learned that Brodie had indeed set aside calves in their names, the beginning of their own herds. Their first winter as a family brought its own challenges: blizzards that isolated the ranch for weeks, a bout of influenza that swept through the bunkhouse, the constant demands of livestock that needed tending regardless of weather. But it also brought moments of unexpected joy. Teaching the boys to read by lamplight, Brodie's deep voice recounting stories of his own childhood, the discovery that James had an uncanny talent for music when Brodie unearthed an old fiddle from the attic. By spring, Beatrice had established a thriving garden of medicinal herbs that drew visitors from neighboring ranches seeking remedies for common ailments. Word of her skills spread, and she found herself becoming a respected healer throughout the county. Brodie built her a small cabin near the main house specifically for her work, and it wasn't unusual to find several patients waiting there on the days she wasn't in town with Dr. Wilson. As the second anniversary of the O'Malley tragedy approached, Beatrice noticed the twins becoming quieter, more withdrawn. She found Jack one evening sitting on the porch steps, staring at the distant hills. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, settling beside him. "I was just wondering if it's wrong that I'm happy," he said quietly. "Pa and Ma are dead, but I'm happy here with you and Brodie and everyone. Is that bad?" Beatrice wrapped an arm around his shoulders. At 8, he was growing tall and lanky, looking more like his father every day. "Your parents would want you to be happy, Jack. Being happy doesn't mean you've forgotten them or love them any less." "I'm afraid I'll forget what they looked like," he confessed, his voice small, "or the sound of Ma's laugh." "I have something for you and James," Beatrice said. "I've been waiting for the right time." She led him inside and retrieved a small wooden box from her dresser. Inside were 2 daguerreotypes she'd managed to salvage from the O'Malley property months after the fire, one of Mary O'Malley in her wedding dress, another of Tom astride his favorite horse. "Where did you get these?" Jack asked, eyes wide as he gently touched the images. "Sheriff Morgan found them in the root cellar, which didn't burn. I've had them cleaned and preserved for you boys." She sat beside him. "Your mother was beautiful and your father was so proud of his family. They loved you boys very much." Jack studied the images intently. "Thank you, Ma," he said, using the term he and James had gradually adopted for her over the past year. It still warmed her heart every time. That night, as she and Brodie prepared for bed, she recounted the conversation. "You were right to save those for them," Brodie said, drawing her into his arms. "They need to remember where they came from even as they build their future here." "I worry sometimes," she admitted. "Am I doing enough? Am I the mother they need?" Brody kissed her forehead. "You're exactly the mother they need. You saved them not just from that fire, but from a life without love or connection. And it's not just Jack and James you've mothered." She looked up at him questioningly. "I've seen how you care for everyone who crosses your path, the cowhands with injuries they try to hide, the homesteaders' children with winter coughs, even old Saul Jenkins, who everyone else avoids because of his cantankerous nature. You've become a mother to half the county, Beatrice O'Connor." She smiled at that. "Hardly, I'm just doing what needs doing." "Which is precisely what makes you extraordinary," he replied, echoing words he'd spoken to her long ago. "Did I tell you what Mrs. Peterson said in town yesterday?" "No, what?" "She said folks have taken to calling you Mother B behind your back. With affection," he hastened to add. "They say if Mother B can't heal it, it can't be healed." Beatrice laughed softly. "That's ridiculous. Dr. Wilson is twice the healer I am." "Maybe with surgical skills and book learning," Brody acknowledged. "But healing isn't just about mending bones or curing fevers. It's about restoring hope, easing suffering. That's what you do better than anyone I've ever known." As she drifted to sleep in his arms that night, Beatrice reflected on the strange path her life had taken. She had come west believing her inability to bear children had closed off the possibility of motherhood forever. Yet here she was, mother to two remarkable boys and, in some small way, to an entire community that had embraced her as she had embraced it. The following spring brought unexpected news from back east. Beatrice's former fiancé had died in a carriage accident, leaving behind a young widow and infant daughter. The widow, Catherine, was Beatrice's distant cousin, and her letter was desperate. With no family willing to take them in and creditors claiming everything of value, she begged Beatrice for assistance. "What will you do?" Brody asked when she showed him the letter. "How can I refuse?" Beatrice replied simply. "Send her the train fare. There's room enough here for 2 more." Catherine and little Emma arrived 6 weeks later, both thin and frightened after their long journey. The young woman was clearly expecting judgment or resentment from Beatrice, but found only compassion instead. "I know he hurt you terribly," Catherine said on their 3rd night after Emma was asleep. "And now I've imposed on your generosity." "Hush," Beatrice interrupted gently. "What's past is past. Edward made his choice, as did I. We've both built lives since then. The only difference is that mine has flourished while yours has met with hardship. That's not your doing." "You've built more than a life," Catherine observed, looking around the comfortable ranch house. "You've built a legacy. Everyone I've met speaks of you with such respect." Beatrice smiled. "I've been fortunate in my second chance at happiness. Now it's your turn. Stay as long as you need, build your strength back. When you're ready, we'll help you find your path forward, whatever that may be." Catherine did stay, gradually becoming an integral part of their household. She had a gift for organization and numbers that proved invaluable as the ranch operations expanded, and within a year, she was effectively managing the rocking Beatrice books. Emma thrived in the healthy outdoor environment, becoming a toddling shadow to the twins, who adored their little sister. As the years passed, their unconventional family continued to grow. A young Hopi woman named Kaya, fleeing an abusive situation, found refuge with them and eventually became Beatrice's apprentice in herbal medicine. An elderly Chinese man, Mr. Li, who had worked on the Transcontinental Railroad and was now without employment or home, became their gardener and taught them all the art of growing vegetables in the arid Arizona soil. When a smallpox epidemic swept through the nearby Apache reservation in 1895, Beatrice didn't hesitate to offer her services, despite the risk to herself. Working alongside the tribal medicine woman, she helped stem the outbreak, earning the lasting gratitude of the Apache people. Several orphaned children from the reservation eventually found homes with families in Copper Creek, a bridge between communities that had previously regarded each other with suspicion. By the turn of the century, the Rocking Bee had become known not just as one of the most prosperous ranches in the territory, but as a place of healing and second chances. People in trouble somehow found their way there, and while not everyone stayed permanently, all were offered rest, care, and the opportunity to rebuild their lives. Jack and James, now 21, had indeed grown into fine young men. Jack had fulfilled his childhood ambition by studying medicine in Denver, returning to establish his own practice in the growing town of Copper Creek. James had developed into a skilled rancher with an innovative approach to cattle breeding that was transforming the rocking Beatrice herds. On a warm evening in the summer of 1901, the extended family gathered on the ranch's wide porch to celebrate Beatrice and Brody's 15th wedding anniversary. The occasion had drawn not just those who lived on the ranch, but friends and neighbors from miles around. Tables groaned with food, fiddle music filled the air, and children darted between groups of chatting adults. As twilight deepened into dusk, Jack called for everyone's attention, raising a glass high. "I'd like to propose a toast," he announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly quieted gathering. 16 years ago, a fire nearly took my brothers and my lives. We lost our parents that day, and we might have lost ourselves to grief and hardship if not for the courage of one woman. He turned to Beatrice, who stood with Brody's arm around her waist. "Ma, you rode into flames and gunfire to save two boys you barely knew. You fought to keep us together when it would have been easier to let us be sent away. You built us a home and a family when we had nothing." James stepped forward to stand beside his brother. "And you didn't stop with us. Look around," he gestured to the gathered crowd, "at how many lives you've touched, how many people you've healed, not just in body but in spirit." Catherine joined them, little Emma, not so little now at 16, at her side. "You've shown us all what it truly means to be a mother, that it's not about bearing children, but about bearing hope, bearing witness to suffering, and bearing up others when they cannot stand alone." From the back of the crowd came Mr. Lee's accented voice. "In my country we have saying, to save one life is to save the world entire. Mother B has saved many worlds." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering. Kaya, now a respected healer in her own right, stepped forward with a beautifully beaded medicine bag. "The elders of my people asked me to present you with this," she said, placing it in Beatrice's hands. "They say you have the heart of 10 mothers, and they honor you as a true medicine woman." Tears welled in Beatrice's eyes as she accepted the gift. Brody's arm tightened around her waist, his pride evident in the way he looked at her. "To Mother B," Jack concluded, raising his glass higher, "who carried no child but became mother to us all." "And to Brody, who had the wisdom to recognize a miracle when he saw one." "To Mother B and Brody," the crowd echoed, glasses lifted to the darkening sky. Later that night, when the guests had departed and the household had settled into sleep, Beatrice and Brody sat alone on the porch swing where he had proposed 15 years earlier. "Happy?" he asked simply, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "Overwhelmingly," she replied, resting her head against his shoulder. "Did you ever imagine when you followed my tracks that night that we'd end up here? Not in the particulars," he admitted, "but I knew even then that you were extraordinary. I just didn't realize how many lives would be transformed because of it, including mine." Beatrice smiled in the darkness. "I came west believing I was somehow incomplete, that my inability to bear children made me less of a woman. How strange that in losing what I thought I needed, I found what I was meant to do. Which is," she considered for a moment, "to mother in a different way, not by giving birth but by giving hope, by creating family where there was none before." Brody kissed her temple gently. "You've mothered an entire territory, Beatrice O'Connor. They don't call this the Mother B Ranch for nothing," she laughed softly. "No one calls it that." "They absolutely do," he insisted with a chuckle. "I've heard it myself in town. The rocking bee is just what's on the paperwork. To everyone who's ever found shelter here, it's the Mother B Ranch." Above them, stars punctured the velvet darkness of the Arizona night, the same stars that had witnessed a desperate ride toward a burning homestead 16 years earlier. Beatrice had never imagined then where that ride would lead to a family created not by birth, but by choice and circumstance, to a community bound together by compassion rather than convention, to a love that had grown steadily stronger with each passing year. I suppose some women are meant to mother a few children very deeply, she reflected, and others are meant to mother many people in different ways. And some exceptional women, Brody said, drawing her closer, are meant to mother the West itself. To heal its wounds, to nurture its growth, to show it a better way forward. Beatrice smiled at his characterization but didn't dispute it. She had long since learned to accept the role life had given her and to embrace it wholly. From the ashes of a burning ranch and the tragedy of 2 orphaned boys, she had indeed become a different kind of mother, one whose family knew no boundaries of blood or background, whose healing touch extended far beyond the physical, whose love had helped transform a rough frontier into a true community. She carried no child, but she had mothered many, and in doing so had found the purpose and family she had once believed forever beyond her reach.